Hey, happy 4th of July, everybody. Here I am, Chris Moore, the Chaos Dragon, working to make the conversation between different voices better understood and more productive. I am so busy, the fact that it is the 4th totally blew by me. Don't understand why, I'm too busy. So, anyways, yes, I need to cut excess things out of my life. At least I am spending time with my family. My son is recording.
Hi, Dad.
This is part 2 of a video series on the subject of the first ever international conference on men's issues that took place last week, June 2014. After reviewing the first video, I realized I was a little like Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Bueller. So, this time I'll try not to put anybody to sleep. For this video, I want to analyze some of the news and web articles produced about the conference, not so much to counter the media's points, which 1, needs done, and 2, I will do in another video, but to explain their reactions to a group advocating for men's issues, and therefore a conference about it. In this, I want to go over some of what was said in the articles and demonstrate why otherwise nice, normal, fair-minded people can be so against the idea of men having societal issues. First, let's start with the definition of Zeitgeist. Dictionary.com states Zeitgeist is the, quote, spirit of the time, general trend of thought or feeling, characteristic of a particular period of time, end quote. So to say anything that goes against the zeitgeist is to not only counter a position, it is to counter what has become a belief system. And when you counter a belief system, many people will automatically, reflexively resist. It is a challenge to their worldview and as such a perceived evil to be eradicated. The reason this reaction occurs is due to how the brain works. When a person has any kind of input from their senses, including written and spoken language, it always goes into the more primitive part of the brain first. In the case of language, that primitive part of the brain accesses the language center of the brain, somewhere right in here, to get the idea of being conveyed, and then reacts emotionally to this idea. Only then does the idea go to the higher thinking part of the brain up in here. Okay, where was I? But with the now attached emotional response. And so, when one conveys an idea that goes against an individual's beliefs, by the time the thinking, most human part of the brain gets it, it starts to think how to counter this attack upon its belief or self-narrative stored in the same brain, instead of analyzing its legitimacy or validity. Simply stated, people react emotionally prior to actually thinking about it. So, to challenge the zeitgeist, as men's issues activists do, you are challenging the individual's belief and come up against a defensive person. And reaching a defensive person to achieve dialogue and exchange of ideas is difficult at best. So how do you do that? How do you reach your fellow human when their belief system tells them you are wrong? That brings us to the style of the message. Why do men's issues activists use the harsher, more confrontational rhetoric that often gets them labeled as hate speech and hate mongers? Well, this style of rhetoric would make some whose worldview you are challenging more defensive than just presenting the facts, right? Well, to answer the question, I'll ask another question. Why wouldn't one use more sedate, less confrontational tone style of rhetoric? The answer is they did for decades. And they have been doing it in the time of the internet as well. So that eliminates the internet as a way of spreading it as the excuse. Dr. Warren Farrell is a prime example of a very nice man using nice and respectful tones, presenting research-backed facts about how our society had done so much to right wrongs and perceived wrongs of the past that it, unbeknownst to most people, had started to infringe upon the rights of the perceived oppressors. In short, not enough people listened and took it to heart. But once the rhetoric started to become reasoned, backed by research and confrontational, only then people started listening. So, why no one was listening to the nicer rhetoric and now resist the harsher rhetoric? So beyond the brain functions to keep an individual from listening to that which they do not believe is the case, as I mentioned before, we now look at how this has become the zeitgeist. My friends, the dissemination of information is called many things. Here, we'll call it by its eventual form, propaganda. To properly indoctrinate the next generation, certain groups have known for a long time, as far back as Roman times, to get children and young adults when their brains are still forming. Since the brain is still undergoing its growth and forming the thinking and judgment part of the brain, up here that I mentioned earlier, until they're 25 years of age, college age is still young enough to indoctrinate. The propaganda, the indoctrination, which early second-wave feminists call higher education, is specifically done through women's studies programs. For an example of the poor history available in women's studies courses, look up Christina Hoff Sommers' YouTube video explaining the errancy of the rule of thumb and her inability to get it taken out of women's studies texts, despite her showing how it is patently false. And in that video, she says specifically it's just one of many errancies that she spotted, told the author about, and has not been changed, even in successive printings. So, for example, when I opened up my first psychology textbook that showed the prominent theories that have made psychology what it is today, it finished with feminist theory. I knew there was potential for trouble. Anytime agenda leads science, we lose science. And among those which the text said were leaders in feminist theory were mostly women's studies educators, not psychology professors. Uh-oh. And now there are programs for all males on many campuses to remind them of how they are all potential rapists, and they need to remember not to rape their fellow classmates. So colleges are a very good source of indoctrination. Another way we have been indoctrinated to following a certain zeitgeist of the woman is great and men is bad is media. A couple quick examples. Everybody Loves Raymond and The King of Queens. Funny to some? Yes. Teaching that men are bumbling idiots and need to be saved by their wives and or kids? Also a yes. News also is a problem. The people in men's rights movement have long said that they cannot find anyone in media to do a fair treatment of interviews and reports. If you think men's issues activists get a fair shot, let's take a look at the reporter during an interview he was conducting with the men's activists at the conference that I've been talking about. Now, I took this picture from their website from a video of the actual interview. It is their property. I'm using it for under the Fair Use Clause for educational purposes. Now I want you to understand, I have nothing against this gentleman. He interviewed me and was cordial and respectful. On the other hand, he may not even be aware of his automatic emotional reaction to the idea that men have issues, which would explain his articles being not so fair in the writing. Let's first look at his arms. They're crossed in front of his chest. Now look at his spine and neck. They're stiff, not leaning back, denoting a relaxed individual, and not leaning forward or with a hand to his chin, denoting interest. He is defensive. He is hearing something that does not sit well with his worldview and is unsettled. Of course he is not going to write a fair article. his emotions have already told him there's danger there, even though there isn't. Men are stereotyped as not needing help. If you are not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, man up kind of alpha male leader, then you better act like it, because men are either leaders or losers in our society. That's the zeitgeist. The concept that men are humans and therefore might need help or just be asking for some fairness in society is unfortunately off-putting. So moving on to the next step, dialogue. We have to keep trying. Only when the message goes out long enough to enough people can we start to counter the current zeitgeist with a new one. A new one that says men and women are equal in value and equal in having strengths and weaknesses, even though the strengths and weaknesses may not be the same. When enough people start to listen, then we can have dialogue. Once we have dialogue, we can get true solutions. Only through dialogue can understanding be passed from one to another. Once you are willing to listen and not just argue, but willing to listen and learn with compassion, you have reached a place where you can truly decide whether or not someone else has a legitimate grievance. The people that showed up at the conference were not there to turn the world upside down. They were there to say that this is a problem and we need to fix it. But we cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it when so many don't even know that there are legitimate problems that exist. So please, join us in turning a new page in the history of equal rights. Please join us in moving to the next natural step in societal fairness. And the stakes on this are high, because the expulsion of fathers from their families is one of the biggest problems for our kids. And what happens to our kids happens to our country in the coming generations. So, if you support equal rights and agree with what I've said here, please like this vid and share it with your friends, and subscribe to let me know that you appreciate the content. If you would like to add to the conversation, please, by all means, leave a comment below. Every bit of information can add to dialogue. If I'm wrong on something, if you see something I said wrong, point it out to me. I'm here to learn. I'm also here to let people know that there are problems. So please, be just as willing to listen. So peace, God bless, and I'll see you next time when I break down the actual articles.